السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا متقبلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نبرأ إليك من حولنا وقوتنا ونلتجئ إلى حولك وقوتك وفتحك وفضلك ورحمتك يا ذا القوة المتين. وبعد فالسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Tonight, inshallah, we'll continue with the series of the Sunnah sciences. At the previous lecture, we spoke about the documentation or writing down and combining the Quran in one mushaf. This was an introduction for the documentation of the Sunnah, how the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was documented during his time and then how it was transmitted. But it makes sense while we're talking about that to talk about how the Quran came about to be combined, to be written and reach to us. We made it clear that the Quran in its entirety was written during the time of the Prophet. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And it has to be clear in everyone's mind. Because as we mentioned last lecture, a lot of people think that the Quran was written or combined during the time of Uthman, and that is far from what's right. It was again written in its entirety, 100% during the time of the Prophet. What was missing? It was the order, because obviously no one knew the Prophet ﷺ was going to die. No one knew exactly. A lot of people, even after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, were still in shock and denial, right? So that tells you this whole process. I mean, people were writing, but not knowing when the Quran is going to end. A lot of surahs, obviously, were completed during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Example, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, he used to say, I used to ask the Prophet ﷺ a lot about the kalala. Right? And al-kalala is when a person dies and he doesn't have children. Who inherits him? This is what Allah said, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْكَلَالَةِ يَسْأَلُونَكَ قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ فِي الْكَلَالَةِ. So the Prophet ﷺ punched him on his chest and said, it's enough for you. Ayatul Sayf. Ayatul Sayf is the ayah that was revealed during summertime. It's called Ayatul Sayf. And the Prophet ﷺ specifically said, التي في آخر النساء, which is at the end of Surah An-Nisa, which tells you it was clear that Surah An-Nisa was completed, perfect, and this is as Ayatul Sayf, as opposed to Ayatul Shita. There is the winter verse, that's at the beginning of Surah An-Nisa. This is not the topic of tonight. I'm just giving you an example where some surahs were known, some were not. Right? So, the Mus'haf or the Quran was completely written, but not in a Mus'haf. And the Mus'haf is a book that contains the entire Quran. Right? The order was not clear. The current look of the Quran obviously was lacking. Now we have the names of the surah, you have the order, the enumeration of the pages, the ayahs. This is what we're going to talk about today, how this come about. So, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, this is what we spoke about last time. Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, at the advice of Umar, bin al-Khattab agreed to combine the Mus'haf, or combine the Quran, after so many people were martyred in Yamama, the battalion of Yamama, which was between the Muslims and the army of Musaylim al-Kadhdhab, the apostasy. And at that time, Abu Bakr, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired him and opened his heart to do that, he asked Zayd, and Zayd again told him, how would I do something the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't do? And then Abu Bakr kept make this matter appealing to him until Zayd agreed to it, and then Zayd was in charge of putting it together. And that was the first Mus'haf in one book now. And it was preserved at the house of Abu Bakr, which was basically the, if you want to call it, the White House, or so the courthouse, or the official formal residence of Amir al-Mu'mineen or Khalifa at that time. That Mus'haf, we mentioned, it took about 1.5 years to put it together. And after Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu passed away, it was transmitted to Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu and stayed at his house. So that was the reference, the reference copy that every one would refer to. And during the time of Uthman, when Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu passed away, was martyred, same thing, the copy, that or original Mus'haf, was transferred to Uthman radiallahu anhu. And everything was great, right? This is where we reached last lecture. So, during the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, the Islamic State took off, and there was a lot of expansion, a lot of countries were conquered. They reached, in the east, they conquered Iraq and Persia, and started even expanding north and northwest, and also went up to the northern part, that's Syria, and even beyond that, and they went east. During the time of Uthman, precisely at the 25th of Hijrah, just to give you an idea how fast the expansion was. Do you know what's the furthest point that the Muslims reached during the time of Uthman, which is precisely 25th year of Hijrah? How far do you think the Muslims reached? China. The first evidence of Muslims reaching China was on the 25th years of Hijrah. Imagine within a quarter of a century, subhanAllah, what's this power? I mean, this is something inconceivable, true. And the only explanation to it is, this is the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imagine these Bedouins who were killing their daughters only few years back. Now they're spreading the guidance to China, subhanAllah. And up north, they reached where? To Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan at that time. That's where Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman radiallahu anhu has reached. And when he traveled from Syria to these areas, now he started seeing people reciting Quran, and people started having accents and some errors in the recitation, and everyone thinks they're right. So he comes back, and now he tells Uthman, you better catch it before people يعني divide and become like al-Yahud wal-Nasara. They don't understand their book, they don't know how to recite it. What's the solution? Executive order from Uthman radiallahu anhu, copy that mushaf and send a copy with a teacher to each country, to each region. Does that make sense? So now, after Umar bin Khattab actually died, the mushaf was passed on to his daughter Hafsa, who was the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-Mu'mineen radiyallahu anha. I misspoke earlier, said it was transferred to Uthman. No, it was to his daughter, to Umar's daughter Hafsa radiyallahu anha. So Umar now asks for the mushaf to be brought to him so they can copy it. And now he gives this job, delegated to a committee of 4 people. That was Zayd bin Thabit, the first one basically who was given that job. And he assigned 3 more with him. That's Sa'id ibn al-As, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, and Abdul Rahman ibn al-Harith ibn Hisham. Radiyallahu anhu ajma'in. Obviously, these were the core committee who started working on the job, but many other people helped. And you see in the books of Sirah and history, it tells you there were 12. Well, the core people were these 4, and headed by Zayd ibn Thabit, actually, he was in charge. But there were many people, and again, they were copying. Now they have a written copy to go by. And they spent a lot of time, and they made several copies. The books of history say 5, 7. Allahu A'lam, it's been, there is good evidence that what happened, that Uthman kept one in Medina for himself, because that was the center, the capital of the Islamic State now. And he sent multiple copies to other areas, regions. That was Mecca, and then Al-Bahrain. And when we say Bahrain, what does Bahrain mean? Bahrain doesn't mean the current Bahrain, by the way. When you say, you read in the Sirah Bahrain, it doesn't mean the current Bahrain. It means what they call now Eastern Saudi Arabia, المنطقة الشرقية, right? Which tells you that this was a pure Sunni state, part of the state. It was in the entire Eastern Arabia. That was at Bahrain. Now Bahrain is a tiny island, but that's when I told you Abu Huraira was the wali in Bahrain. It was the eastern region of Arabia. And they sent a copy to Syria, a copy to Al-Basra, a copy to Al-Kufa. These were the main headquarters, basically, of Islamic presence, where biggest communities were available, and one to Al-Yemen, actually. So these are the main regions. But the copy wouldn't do anything. A lot of people think, okay, now Uthman sent a copy. It wasn't about the copy. He sent also one of the companions to be basically the reference and to teach people that recitation. Does that make sense? So it wasn't just like a copy. No, he sent a teacher, and this is the way the Quran is taught. You see how kids sit in the Halaqa and recite Quran, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. This is it. For 1400 years, this is the way the Quran taught. And that's why, if you want to observe how the Quran was preserved and transmitted, you just go to a Halaqa and you see how you memorize the Al-Fatiha and Qul Huwallahu Ahad. Same way. So there was no room for error. But now they have a reference if they have a question and if they had any doubt or controversy. This is a book that was approved, authenticated by the capital of Khilafah, by the Islamic State. It has to be noted, though, that the way, the script in which those mushafs were copied or were written, the transcription basically, was in a certain way, which is they call the Uthman calligraphy or the Uthman script, which was consistent with the language of Quraysh only. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, the Quran has been revealed unto me according to 7 different tongues, and the tongues mean the language. Right? And during that time, since Islam has become widely spread, and a lot of people were urbanized now, they're not in rural areas, and the rare languages were being actually eliminated and faded away gradually. Uthman felt there was no need for these tiny languages. The Prophet ﷺ was described like some tribes would come to him, he would be sitting with a crowd, he would be talking to them in Arabic, other Arabs wouldn't understand what he's saying. This is how exotic some of these dialects were. Totally different. And even the current, what's considered approved Arabic dialects according to Quraysh, they're still actually kind of weird, and we'll give you some examples tonight, inshallah. So Uthman said you limit it to the dialect, the tongue or language of Quraysh. This is when they say Al-Khatt al-Uthmani, the Uthman script, this is what's meant. The way Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu approved these mushafs to be written. Why is that important? Because if you open the mushaf, in the first page, what do they write on it? Such and such was honored by writing this mushaf. Who's that? The most common one you see between your hands, what you're reading here, was written by Uthman Taha. Who's Uthman Taha? He's the Turkish scribe who had the honor of writing this mushaf. What you're reading now, this is a Turkish actually scribe. And subhanAllah, Allah willed his name to be the same name as Uthman bin Affan. Allah gave that honor, subhanAllah, to the two Uthmans. Right? Bring us the mushaf, ya Shaykh Nasir. Jazakallah khairan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. لا لا بكثير. This is Mushaf al-Madina. Yeah, Mushaf al-Madina, this is Mushaf al-Madina, does not actually Now you see it in the last page. You read the last line, the last line, and it says Al-Khattat or Uthman Taha. You see it? Now, subhanAllah, his name on every Mushaf. Imagine that, subhanAllah. You see it in the bottom. In a lot of others, they put it in the first page, like, was honored by writing or scribing this Mushaf with Taha. And that's why, if you notice, in few actually lines, you see there's like some asymmetry of the letters, subhanAllah. Like the hand probably moved or was, tremoring a little bit. That's, to show you the imperfections of a human being, subhanAllah. So when we say Al-Khatt al-Uthmani, it is not his khat, it means Uthman bin Affan according to the language of Quraysh. And it is not the Ottoman, the Uthmani meaning the Ottoman, the Turkish Empire. Okay. So, because also, who was the first, it's funny, because where was the first Mus'haf printed? And when? Oh, what? In Iraq? Why in Iraq?
Yes.
You would think Egypt maybe.
مصحف الذي كان عند حفصة.
No, طباعة الحديثة يعني press, current modern press after the press machine was invented.
بيروت.
That's a good guess because Beirut was one of the first actually cities to implement modern.
أو دمشق.
Dimashq. You would think Istanbul. It was not actually. It was in Luxembourg or in Germany. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Believe it or not. Yani, this is the shame yani, of how the Muslims yani, were backward and behind. At that time, the Fatwa Council in the Ottoman Empire voted against it. And they think, oh, now it's going to be yani, a reason for people to change the Mus'haf. And were backward, basically. They were kind of not open-minded. And obviously, just like, you can be back in math and science and everything, you can be back also in understanding what the life is all about and where people are and what's being done, right? Imagine now someone, a country who does not have internet, for example. It was the same concept. Why? Because internet will bring us, all these sins and same thing. This was the thinking behind it. The Muslim has to be always on the forefront, using technology, modern technology, for the benefit of the Muslims, for the benefit of faith and strengthening. So now we came basically to the Mus'haf, and then Istanbul took it, and now. But in between what happened, so we have Al-Khatt al-Uthmani, the Mus'haf was copied, and after that, copies were produced, and then Uthman ordered everything else is not approved anymore. These are the references, because now there is no room for teaching people or someone claiming to teach people wrong things. So everything was obsolete, and these were the approved authentic copies, and then they started copying and copying. The interesting thing, the copy, or these copies, which Uthman radiallahu anhu authorized, they did not have the dots and they did not have the vowels. Right? So these came later. So, when were the dots invented? When did anyone has any idea? They were actually, that's what you would think. Alyusr al-Du'ali, or his student Nasr bin Asim, and the other one, they were credited to dotting the Mus'haf, putting these dots, because people started making mistakes. Right? But the dots were known hundreds of years before them, but the Arabs in Quraysh did not use them. So they were there, but the Arabs did not use them because there was no need for it. Right? And then same thing, they introduced the vowels, the fatha, the dhamma, the kasra, the sukun, also to make it easier for people. So that, it is funny that, kind of weird, and subhanAllah, I never assume that someone is all evil, because do you know who's the one who gave the order, or the one who gets the credit for giving the order of putting the dots in the Mus'haf? Who would you think? Al-Hajjaj. Al-Hajjaj, the one who killed, massacred. Do you know how many people Al-Hajjaj killed? How many people do you think? How many? About 125,000 people. That would be an entire nation. That's the Holocaust, subhanAllah. And yet, there is always that tendency to respect the Quran, esteem it, preserve it, and So again, you never know. This little deed or this important deed could be something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would magnify and credit him for. These things are not 100% authentic, but that's what appears to be the historical and chronological sequence of how the Quran transcription evolved. Then, what is important to understand that in the Mus'haf that happened or that was written during the time of Abu Bakr, the order was complete. And later on, it wasn't in the Mus'haf of Uthman, they started giving the names of the surah. Where are the names of the surahs come from? Is this something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has named? Apparently not. This is the way the surah was known during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet, as you know, mentioned whoever reads Al-Baqarah or Al-Imran, so he specifically named them, but some were not given. And that's why they were known by the Sahaba, amongst the Sahaba. Like Surah Al-Qital, for example. That's Surah many surahs were just known by what it's famous for, about the story, about this and that. But not every single one was named or was known to be named by the Prophet ﷺ. The order of the surah, same thing. It appears some of it was specified by the Prophet ﷺ. Some of it was just by the ijtihad of the Sahaba. However, the orders of the verses in each surah is specifically by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's what they call tawqifi, meaning this is the way